That's good. Yeah, that's good. She wouldn't have a fire today, she should not come. I poured this much wine.
Guess what?
Somebody on the fire. What'd you do when you give them wine?
Cookies. Popcorn.
If I had thought I was, break it down the store.
After the story you told me, I remember your doctor.
That was good.
Yeah, once since I didn't feel good. I shouldn't eat sweet stuff really late.
Yeah, I'm gonna go up on all those.
And I've been pretty good about it.
Always gonna be very
I want them, so.
This is so far away, but I see them, I did ask them.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't, I came from
So
away.
last night was my granddaughter's.
And there it is, and there it was.
Yeah, right. But it was nice.
Senior last game as a senior basketball game, as a senior in high school.
But I slept really well.
She
I
was
was
4 years later.
And you chased the rabbits.
And she played other games.
But the tournament is coming up, so should probably.
It's quite amazing.
I would imagine.
Some little things, you go to Costco's there.
When I walked out of there, son of a wife and I went.
Oh,
We had the.
well, Costco's not trying to look for
Her parents.
because they're terrible. I would go on Saturday or Sunday and Florida, so we have to. But if you go on Monday or
You know,
Tuesday,
she's the second, third eldest of my children.
it's really crowded. Going
The other
early.
two,
Yeah.
when they graduated high school, mazel tov, continues to do like this one.
I know, choices.
So losing a child.
I went,
Because
I've
I've been with her.
I know.
Old. I can find out. Well, she's 18, so I should expect that.
He's looking for me to be at Costco on Tuesday.
Oh, I just did it. My daughter,
Lines that grandparents take a look at the grades.
It's dark.
She put that because she one said you
No, that's mine.
These are as bad as to-go containers. You keep trying to get rid of them and giving them to like here. Oh, okay, well, I didn't know that. I'm sure there are some jars so funny, hiding something.
I have the art opener.
Oh, okay.
The bars are too old, here she is.
my kids out
Oh, I got a whole sermon out of it. And how many ministers this morning are going to use it? Yes, yes, yeah. The opening, the middle, the highlight, the end, go crazy. Okay. This may open up a new language that will be necessary to differentiate itself from this sort of ritual. So there's going to be ways that, like speaking in a scary. It is. It's really changing things.
He and his wife, India,
Bulbs. Okay.
state superintendent.
I'm good.
Some occasions.
Easter is always on the second.
No,
It goes by the Jewish calendar.
it's a certain number, but then it depends, if Greek or the Orthodox count it differently. Yeah. Do you know, they came so close to resolving it, and in the last minute, they got into a question over transubstantiation. It's like, come on. Yeah. Play nice.
No, because I know that it was Passover that was betrayed by Judas.
It has to do with
Yes, yes.
Couple of the cases,
Well, it looks so pretty when you walk outside.
Well,
And then you get in the car and you go,
I know, I keep looking at it.
my bulbs are coming up.
I know that. Some are,
Really?
and they're, you know, like every
Including the owners.
I guess the weather was listening to Torah Studies, that's why I got confused.
I'm not speaking. If I have anything different new to say, I will, but
Can
I
you keep that?
yes, I'm not gonna do it.
Why? I have to change
Love
that.
it.
I know. But I keep saying yes. That's what's interesting. Let me tell you something. The balance of what's in here and what's thousands of years of commentary. Whole life on it. I think it's very interesting.
It's just this one about how the Ten Commandments are the
Yes, right, yes.
They just like threw them in it, like it's a good song.
That's a great.
And they're not all done in the same verb tone.
Yeah.
It seems that so.
Uh-oh, what's there?
You know, the chat GPT, the artificial intelligence.
Oh.
So I wrote a sermon for the rabbi on poetry. And this thing spit out in 3 seconds an entire sermon. Very easy. So I said, yeah.
What? No.
I have for you.
What do you have?
Okay, so the chat GPT, the robots, I had them write you a sermon. That's for you, you can use it if you want.
I prefer a sermon series.
It took it 3 seconds to write. Yeah. But it's on poetry. So I thought it'd be a sermon.
I can just phone this in now. Getting better. Thank you.
It's actually sort of good.
It knows it's poetry, huh?
It hits all the marks.
That's great, thank you.
What did you at least give it? What did you give it?
So I said,
Hey, Jordan, thank you.
that's it. Anyway, and it was done.
Oh, that's terrible.
I'm going to see if I can have it write a complex poem about poetry that will include things like physicians and scholars and try to throw
Get
more
the
words
audience
and
to
variables and see if it can write better.
Are you?
Hence,
You are. I saw your
Thank
name
you.
up there.
where's my name?
Your name is now on.
It's on the
the
bagel. Okay. It's on the table, because you sponsored me.
Did you guys happen to go to the concert?
Oh, live stream, what, well, thank you.
Tomorrow? Tonight. Yeah, we're gonna be there tonight too. Nice review in the paper this morning.
But I've listened to 12 years.
Yeah.
That's such good reviews.
Or the Mahler is a war horse, isn't it? Especially the way it ends.
Well, it's nice to be here. Nice to be where we're supposed to be. On Saturday.
I think you're right. I must have read it. Yeah. And did you see the piece in the New York Review of Books on Carlos Kleiber? Very interesting. Evidently, he was an astonishing conductor. I mean, I know the name. I'm sure I've heard some stuff, but what do I know? But still, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Nice to see everybody this morning. Let me thank those who have contributed to today's bagels. Bagel sponsored by Dr. Brian Berman, who is tuning in from Detroit. Did you guys know Brian Berman? Yeah. Who was a stalwart Torah Study person for many, many years. He used to sit right over there next to Maida. And I'm in touch with Brian. And Brian, thank you so much for sponsoring our bagels this morning. Streaming sponsored by Kathy, is it Rizos?
Yes.
Rizos. And pickup by Candy, Anchor. No, she did not do that. We're having a lot of trouble with the pickup issue.
Not this time.
Who picked up this morning?
I wasn't supposed to. No.
Are there bagels? Somebody picked up.
I did.
Oh, you did, Joan. Okay.
Well, it got very complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure. I thought Cindy had straightened it out. Okay, no harm done. Candy, I'm going to subtract the credit I just gave you. Very good. So thanks to Joan and to Kathy and to Brian. And welcome to those who are live streaming. So let's continue with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us with God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so we left off last week, not sure if we read any of the Song of Moses in chapter 15, but we do, did we? We did not. Okay. But I want to move on to chapter 16. We are now on the way to Sinai, and we have these chapters 16, 17, and 18, which lead us to Sinai. The people arrived there at the beginning of chapter 19. So where are we in the story? We have spent 15 chapters discussing the movement from slavery to freedom. And now the people are free. Pharaoh and his army have been destroyed, pushed back at least. And the Israelites have gone through the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, on dry ground. And if you can picture that with walls on either side and dry ground on which they walk, it certainly is an image of the birth canal. So what we have here is another birth story, now of a people and not just individuals. And so this is a high climactic moment. It's a culmination of a long process, and we expect it to continue along that line as the people move towards Sinai for another milestone event, the receiving of the Ten Commandments and by implication the Torah. What happens in these intermediate chapters, 16, 17, and 18, I find quite astonishing. I don't know whether you're going to go as far as I do on that description, but what the Torah does here, what the author does, and I think it's the product of a quite striking imagination. Just at this high watermark, this acme of the entire process, the author turns to problems. And there are 3 of them. I think we can agree that these 3 are the problems, the impediments that really shadow our lives. So what the author is doing is really a couple of things. Trying to not over-idealize the moment at which we find ourselves, but to move from ideal to real, and to recognize that as much as we accomplish things or are accomplished for us, we're going to always face impediments to their continued realization. And I want to just look at chapters 16 and 17, to beginning really right away after this, the Song of the Sea in chapter 15, and to see what these impediments are. And I'm going to name them right now. There are challenges from nature. Nature is not, as we know, always friendly to us. Nature can be a foe as well as a friend. And the author is quite surgical about this, it seems to me. There is the impediment of other peoples. So, foes, enemies. Maybe the question here is one of scarcity, that there are not enough resources to go around, and therefore competition among peoples is going to be ongoing. And then there's the impediment from human nature. We ourselves stand in our own way. And it seems to me that these chapters point out all of these problems so that we can arrive at Mount Sinai sobered, in the mood of realism, knowing that as much as we strive, as much as is given, there are always going to be obstacles in the way, and we have to contend with them if we can. So, let's look at chapter 15, verse 22. So what do we have in the preceding couple of verses? 15:20. Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced in timbrels, and Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." So Miriam repeats, although not exactly verbatim, mostly verbatim, the opening verses of the Song of the Sea. Maybe this is a repetition, as it seems to be here. We might even say a distillation. Or maybe it was the original song, now elaborated in verses 1 through 18. Okay? But in any event, it's another high moment where Miriam and the others sing again, a distillation. Verse 22. Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness, and they found no water. Impediment number 1, the privations of nature. Nature is not always providing. They came to Marah, which means bitter, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses. Now, we can understand this. They've just come from liberation, and they don't have what they need. So the grumbling, I think, is not to be taken as a human nature problem. Saying to Moses, what shall we drink? So Moses cried out to the Lord. Does it seem Moses is now put upon? And the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. The miracles continue, although it's utilizing natural elements for it. And there he made them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. He said, if you will heed to the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping all of his laws, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. This is a bit strange. Commandments and laws have not been given yet. And yet there is already a suggestion that we have them at our disposal. Maybe I overstate the matter. Maybe this is just prospective. But it seems to suggest that laws and commandments are already here. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm springs, and they encamped there beside the water. Setting out for Elim, the whole Israelite community came to the wilderness of Sin. Sin has nothing to do with sins. This is a place name, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after the departure from the land of Egypt. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. Okay? That is a human nature issue, isn't it? The people are now free, and we know the burdens of freedom, and it's a new experience, a new beginning, so we have some sympathy with them, and yet they're resisting the call of freedom. They would rather go back and be slaves in the land of Egypt so that they have full bellies, rather than facing the opportunity of freedom. Okay? So this is, I might say, the second problem that the author is raising. The privations of nature, no water. Now the problems of human nature, that we resist going off into the unknown for the sake of promises or visions. And the Lord, verse 4, said to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. And the test is, do they believe there will also be manna tomorrow, as God has promised? Or will they store up some of today's because they're skeptical about tomorrow? But on the sixth day, when they apportion what they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day. Shabbat is on the horizon. Don't gather on Shabbat, because there is not going to be any manna. Okay? So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, by evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. We need another initiative from God to let them know that it was God who brought them out of the land of Egypt. Now, it's quite clear to us that the author is making an unmistakable claim that it was God. Right? The whole story, 1 through 15, is God-inspired, directed, with Moses. I say it this way because though it's crystal clear to us, the reader, that the author feels that it was God who did it, and of course, since there were the plagues, and especially the last couple of plagues, which affected the Egyptians, the darkness and the sacrifice of the firstborn, but did not affect the Israelites, that should have been evidence enough that somehow there is a miracle at work here. And yet, verse 6 casts doubt on whether the people have yet been convinced. So Moses and Aaron, verse 6 again, said to the Israelites, "By evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Here's the way I like to put this. What's the half-life of a miracle? How long does the miracle work in the minds of the people? This seems to be a piece of evidence, I don't want to make too much out of it, that miracles lose their impact before too long. Why might they? Because they are external events and are likely not to touch the convictions of the people. What is required for the durability of a vision is that we internalize it. We see the point either inherently or its instrumental value. Okay? Something about what happens to us isn't as compelling as what we ourselves are motivated to do. That's sort of a speculation about it. But not only, I think, is it quite stunning that the people need constant reminders, but as I've said before, the frequency of miracles diminishes as the biblical story progresses, as if the biblical author or editor realizes this point too. What has to happen is the internalization of the value, and not just that it happens as a spectacle. So, verse 6 again. Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "By evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you should grumble against us? Since it is the Lord," Moses continued, "who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full, because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." That's a very human moment, isn't it? Where the issue of leadership in its personal impact emerges, doesn't it? That the leader, especially if the leader is taking the people to a new place, either physically or spiritually or ethically, the leader, because of the resistance of the people to something new, something problematic, is likely to be returned to the leader as a critique, as a criticism. And here you remember Moses trying to get out of his commission as a prophet at the beginning. Who am I? Who are you? Who is the people? I don't speak very well. Those 4 attempts to say to God, no, I'm not the right person. Moses had a good insight there, didn't he? At the challenges of leadership, because you're going to meet resistance if you're trying to take the people to a new place. And Moses is now saying, wait a minute, it's not us, it's God. Don't blame us. Verse 9, then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling." And as Aaron spoke to the whole community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud appeared the presence of the Lord. Okay, things are good again. The Lord spoke to Moses, "I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. And you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God." I can see the power of this verse before the Exodus in Egypt. I'm going to bring you out. After, the image that springs to my mind is Hanukkah gifts. First night, second night, third night, fourth night, gift after gift after gift. On the 9th night, namely the night after Hanukkah's over, the kid turns to the parents and say, "Well, you never give me anything." Right? So, in the morning, at the end of verse 12, "You shall know that I, the Lord, am your God." I mean, why do they need yet? This is the generation that experienced more miracles than any generation in the Bible. And yet they still need to know this, which strikes me as, one could say it's ungrateful, but on the other hand, how to put this? There is something about what is happening to them that is not yet convincing. I don't much like what I've just said. How do we understand the people's grumbling at this, that their need to have evidence at this point, more evidence? Haven't they had enough? They walked on dry ground with walls of water. Now that doesn't happen through natural causation. That is one of your, let's call it, huge miracles. If anything should be decisive, that's it. Any thoughts, Maida?
Well, don't people want that sense of security that this is going to continue? That they're not going to be stranded someplace?
Okay, so Maida is raised. I'm trying to remember to repeat the questions for those who are live streaming. Isn't it understandable in terms of the people's need for security in an ongoing way? So are we always, let's suppose at time t, we get some assurance that things are okay. Maida's suggesting at time t plus 1, the next moment, we're likely to feel insecure again. Do we need assurance every single moment? Can't we, when things like what has happened to the people in an overwhelming way, come to feel some confidence that we don't need it every single moment? I mean, so should the parents be giving presents on the 9th day of Hanukkah? On the 10th, on the 11th, on the 12th, on the 13th, on the 15th day they don't do it. I'm not sure you love me. I mean, is that what we need? Maybe that's right. The insecurity of life continues to loom, even if the things that make us secure happen, I want to say enough, but that's not right. Happen regularly, something like that. Jim?
I think just it's human nature to not like change. And obviously they didn't know what might happen, but if you think about what happened in this country with the emancipation, for a very long time, the black, Negro, African American, whichever period of time you want to use, for a long, long time, and maybe even now,
Yeah.
they were in worse shape than they were when they were slaves.
Yeah, one could
Because
say
they had
that, sure.
absolutely no opportunity to support themselves.
Right. Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction within 10 years, Jim Crow. So I want to emphasize something that Jim has just said. People don't like change, or they don't like the possibility that change is going to happen. And that's the definition of future. We don't know. So maybe it is that what the Torah is indicating here is as much security as we might feel up to this moment, the next moment is unknown, and the unknown is itself scary and might forecast a change. And so the nature of living in time, that's really what you're suggesting. The nature of time as we experience it is always anxiety-inducing. Which leads to the question, are there antidotes to this anxiety? Are there things that we can do or can be done for us that alleviate, if not eliminate, the anxiety? Here's a suggestion that just now occurred to me over and against this issue. Mount Sinai. Law, institution, some predictability in our lives, so that tomorrow, which by definition is scary, isn't as scary because I know there are foundations of my society, however fragile or at risk or under assault they might be. Lynn?
Yes. Are we losing sight that these people have been oppressed and enslaved and tortured for how many years? So if anything, they may be just insecure that this is going to continue, and that's the reason why they wander 40 years in the desert, so you get another generation with a different mindset. I don't think there's any clear answer to this, and nothing relatable to what any of us or most normal people might experience with the uncertainty of the future. They didn't have any future.
They didn't have any.
They did not. Well, while they were living in Egypt, they had no future. They just had, embroiled slavery and hard work and, oppression mentally and physically. So, if anything, there's no explanation as to why they didn't trust it, because it certainly was a huge miracle.
Good.
But then it could be too that they couldn't believe it all because they came from such a life that showed no open pathways.
Good, good. So far what I'm suggesting here is that the Torah is giving us some understanding of human nature and how we interact with our environment. What Lynn is suggesting is perhaps that prism is unfair because the people are not yet ready to face their reality with more confidence, with more boldness, with more hope. I think it's a good point, so that what we might be seeing here, just working off Lynn's point a little bit, is a developmental story as well. The people are still in their infancy, and therefore one can't expect of a people still so dependent to be able to respond with a bit more confidence and a bit more hope. And maybe we'll see that as the people mature. So that is another way of looking at that. I happen to think myself, just to say it, that I recognize, I don't know whether you do, these problems in my own experience of life. And therefore, it seems to me that though, Lynn, you very well may be right, and maybe that's finally what we ought to keep in mind, that the people can't be expected, the universality as we infer, here we're dealing with the people in a particular time and place. So if you're understanding the historical process, the people are infants. If you want to lift out of the historical timeline and ask ourselves, what things have universal meaning and applicability, then there's a second way of understanding it. And that depends upon whether we do see universal applicability. And I suppose that's up to each of us. I think, though, that the author, the editor of the Torah, is throwing a bit of cold water on the high water mark, just to continue that image, of the rescue at the Red Sea and the celebration. bringing us back to earth as the Torah regularly does. I mean, just think about the career of King David. King David is on the march. He's going to be the great king. God loves him. Everybody loves him. And by the time he ascends to the throne, everybody but his wife Michal, his ex-wife Michal, adores him. Then we have the Bathsheba episode. And we have Nathan coming in and reading the riot act to David, and the whole thing falls apart. The family is in chaos. There's rebellion among the children and against David. I think it's another good example of the Torah trying to reach the mountaintop and then telling us it's not all that it's cut out to be, and that though high points happen, they're always under a corrosive threat of other realities. I see that here. Why? For one of two reasons. It's here, or I would like it to be here. So, some of the process of reading is that we bring our own biases. When I work with bar bat mitzvah kids, I always talk to them about the ethics of reading. The author, who's the interlocutor of the reader, right, is not in the room. So the author can't say to the reader, you missed my point. Therefore, it's up to the reader to put aside his or her own biases, predilections, and try to let the voice of the author shine through. Before I can offer my interpretation, that's part of the ethics of reading. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself. So I'm admitting a certain desire to see something here, and the challenge might be, have I put my desire aside long enough to get what the author is saying? And I think that, Lynn, you are suggesting that maybe my reading, I know you're not talking about me per se, might be a product of my hope to find certain things in the text, and not so much to reckon with an element of the text which my reading doesn't accommodate, and that is the people are still infants. So I like this because we're all interested in the question of how to access what is really going on around us and not just to impose our own biases on what is going around. It has to do with relationships and all of that. Kathy, and then Maya.
I want to stitch together two ideas that you brought out. A God who has decreasing levels of intercessionary miracles. And when you said, what can be done to stop the anxiety? Well, these people just saw a sea pull apart and they walked through. Would not people have like a little bit of a psychotic breakdown after seeing the laws of nature changing? I think that God is pushing people in an abnormal way. After all they had just seen happen in Egypt with the plagues and this and that, these are traumatized people.
Yes.
Not so much infantile people. They're normal. If one fraction of a percentage of any of this happened to us, we'd lose our minds. So the very fact that they're holding together and grumbling about dinner is actually healthy because they're trying to pull it back into reality. We gather, we eat, we store. That's getting back to like thinking normally again. Yeah. I don't think that's infantile at all. I think God needs to back away and leave him be a little bit. Of course, I might just be reading this into it.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, well, that's a strong claim. Surprises happen. Just to take what may be a fable, Isaac Newton is sitting under the tree one day and an apple falls on his head. And my God, that's the law of gravity right there. A small formula that accounts for every interaction between bodies in the entire universe.
But we have
So-
to have an appreciation of an ancient person. And they lived within a beautiful set of understanding of how nature worked. The time, the
All I'm
moon,
saying is that there can be an extraordinary event, like the splitting of the Red Sea, like the apple falling on his head. The question is, what do you do with that? And I think that at least the Torah would like us to have the people make something positive out of the blessings that happen to them in life, which requires their own motivation and action. In other words, the people, look, I mean, you might say it's God needs to leave them alone. And in a way, that Torah does move in that direction, where the people increasingly get on their own. But this is one of those moments, let's just assume that it's real, one of these moments when you have an epiphany of something amazing. You know, in a way, it's like falling in love. All of a sudden, there's a new energy in your life, and the question is, what do you do with that? How do you cultivate that relationship, and so on? So, yeah, I mean, your interpretation is quite imaginative. I think I disagree with it, but I love the word attempt occurs to me, but that in a way is problematically critical. I like the imagination of it. And I think one of the things that comes from your interpretation is that God is also formidable, scary, as well as helpful. And this may be one of the things you're pointing to, that the intercession of this God is overwhelming and not necessarily in a good way. Yeah. Maya?
From imagination to reality. So, and a little bit to support what Lynn was saying, when you read about the Israelites, about we sent by the flesh pots, it reminds me of Hungary, my being in Hungary in 1956 or whatever, when the Hungarian Revolution was. And many Jews decided that this is an opportunity to leave communism and emigrate to Israel. And the famous saying was, are you having a complex of the flesh pot? The complex of the flesh pot.
Namely?
That means, are you afraid to leave your comfort zone and go to the unknown? And I thought that it's very nice to tie that up,
Nice.
that the story is still...
Nice, very, very good. So you are also lifting something universal out of this image. Yeah. Whereas Lynn is pointing to the process of maturation, at which we're at the very beginning. Ron?
We don't know much from the Torah of what the belief system of the Israelites was until these episodes.
Okay.
All of a sudden, they have God. Brand new. We don't have any evidence that they knew about this God or that they knew anything relative to this God's demands. There's a little bit of an element, I think, of retraining. Training. After all, we as a religious base, don't allow someone to walk through the front door on day one and say, look, I've been raised in another religion all of my life. I want to be a Jew today. Thank you very much. May I have the paper? We require them to go through a period of education, a period of familiarity, a period of acceptance. I think that is pretty germane to this story. Why 40 years? Because it took that long, generationally, for this new entity, this brand new idea of our God, to take root amongst the people.
Yeah.
I think there may also be a teeny bit of fear in the form of, wow, he gave us this, he gave us that, he gave us this, he gave us that. When's the payback? When's he going to demand something of us?
Yeah.
That'll cut off our lifeline.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's in here as well.
That the payback is the deprivation.
The payback would be the refusal of the entity, because he's not accepted as God yet,
Okay.
obviously.
Okay.
The refusal of the entity to keep pouring manna in the desert,
Yes.
if we don't do what?
Follow the commandments and the laws, as it says
We
here.
don't have yet.
Well, that's, right, no, that's right, yeah. So,
Anyway, that's.
no, it's a very good, very, very well said as well. I think one of the points that Ron makes is, the people didn't know God before. For 500 years. At least the Torah is silent about it. So we can't, from silence, the argument from silence doesn't really work. But the Torah says, doesn't say anything about that period. And then all of a sudden, God says, I'm looking down on the people and I see that they're suffering, and now I intend to do something about it. So the Torah makes a point of God's coming out of his, let me call it, God's onlyness, to now interact with the people. I mean, I think that's a kind of an illustration of your point here, so that you are making Lynn's point in another way. The people don't know this yet, and so it takes some time to do it. So we have three grids at work here. We have the universalizing grid. That's my grid. We have the temporality grid. That what can we expect at this point in the process? And Ron illustrates it with the fact that there's 40 years. Originally, it wasn't going to be 40 years. You remember, it's only 40 years because in the book of Numbers, the people grumble, which is a sign that they're not ready. And so that generation has to die out, which in a way is an extreme form of your understanding. It's not that the people need time to be educated. It's that that particular generation has been so under the thrall of servitude that they can't be educated. Something like that. That's the conclusion that God draws. So we have, let's rename these grids. Mine is the attempt at timelessness. That time doesn't matter here. These are universal issues. The Ron Lynn agenda, that's not agenda, the group, the Ron Lynn group, is insisting on temporality. That's what this is all about, that the people, it's quite clear the people aren't ready. Because, for obvious reasons that Ron and Lynn both have. Kathy's grid is something shocking has happened here. And the people are reacting in a grotesque way. And what can you expect so far? I mean, God's doing all these miracles, all these big things. If only God, I mean, we can't live intensely every moment of the day. God has to back off a little bit so some kind of normalcy can emerge. but normalcy within norms and institutions. This is where we're going. So let us have a vote. We arrived at the voting moment earlier than we generally do. But, so, we're going to talk about the Ron Lynn caucus. We're going to be talking about poor Roger Klein's caucus and the Kathy caucus. You only get one vote. Everybody have one? Which one you prefer? Try not to hurt my feelings here. No, I'm kidding. I'm so totally kidding about that. How many are in the Ron Lynn camp? Temporality. They're immature, so we can understand what they're doing here without a big critique. How many again? Okay. How many in the Kathy caucus? Whoa. Oh my gosh. This table is, you gotta watch out for this table. And how many are in the poor Roger Klein caucus? Okay, yeah. So, the Kathy caucus kind of has the majority here. Okay, so I think one of the things to learn from that is there are 3, according to us, viable ways of trying to understand this. Okay. Vivian?
This is going to be a short comment, but I see that the discussion here is our trouble or leaping from fable to teaching, which the Torah gives us both. And you keep identifying where we might be seeing a metaphor or a law, commandment, order of people to follow. I mean, this whole is a journey here. It is not a birth, literally. It is a journey to a peoplehood.
There you go. Good. I like that. Would you accept the following restatement of your point?
Okay.
That in some significant way the Bible is an allegory.
Yes, but then you could argue that it's history. I mean, we could go into that, into that, all kinds of crevices there. But yes,
No,
yes,
it's poetry.
yes.
And the origin of the word poetry is, poesis means to make, to create. So the author has created a story of universal applicability. That's why we keep reading it.
Could you?
Cindy?
Well, isn't the genius of this book is that all 3 grids work and intersect?
There you go. I'll do that. Very nice. Very nice. Gosh. I like that. I'm thinking of an analogy or another example of it. Well, that's very, very good. I mean, think of the Iliad. It works on a huge canvas, the war between, say, it also works on a very intimate individual. Think of the Odyssey, where Odysseus' son is searching for him, and finally Odysseus comes back, and the son, I can't remember exactly, but they team up, don't they, to kill the suitors. So that small level, large level.
Rabbi?
Yes.
There's a question.
Yeah, I know. Good.
No, it's not a question.
You guys are working together, aren't you?
Yes, we are.
Could you please explain to us then, historically, what was God's, in the people's life when they were in Egypt?
Yes.
Over those whatever number of years, and I don't know, what was the place of God in their lives? What was a Jew in those times? And the one comment, that's a question I really would like you to share with us, information, and then I.
Be an easy thing to answer.
But I'm saying, all of a sudden it pops up there's a God.
Right.
And how come Moses was trying to convince the Egyptians that we have a powerful God, and finally they realized it, and then of course with the Red Sea they really realized it, but the Jews didn't. So, to me, that's because they were so oppressed, that their mind wasn't free thinking.
Sure.
But I'd like to know what Judaism was in the lives of that slavery period, because there was Joseph and there was Jacob prior to all this.
Right. The Torah is completely silent about that. Nearly half a millennium, 480 years. I mean, we know nothing, which makes all the more surprising if we take that seriously, that God all of a sudden appears. All of a sudden, God is back. But we know nothing about it. Now, the rabbis, the Midrash, asks the following interesting question. How is it that this people survived in an inhospitable, not total, there arose a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph, so it was probably hospitable, but the pressures of assimilation must have applied to those people to some degree. There's a famous, maybe fabricated conversation between Catherine the Great is she Russia, and Maria Theresa, how to deal with their Jews. And Catherine says, I'm going to persecute them. And Maria Theresa says, I'm going to leave them alone. Both will arrive at the same end. Assimilation, leave them alone. They'll feel at home. They'll begin to import into their lives the mores of and pretty soon they'll be gone. So the Midrash raises the question, how come half a millennium later there's still this community of Israelites? Then they speculate they gave their children Jewish names, they circumcised their children. In other words, they survived on their own by fidelity to the kinds of things that we learn in the book of Genesis. Malcolm?
I think one way to look at this period is the question of faith.
Faith?
Faith.
F-A-I-T-H.
F-A-I-T-H. The relationship of humans to God.
Yeah.
So what are miracles but phenomenon, events that we don't understand? So there are miracles today.
Yeah.
Or there are things that happen to us today that we don't understand.
Right.
And it requires some faith on our part, and I think similarly to this community of Jews. And God is testing their faith, or they are developing a faith in this covenant, which will ultimately deliver them to some better place.
Right.
But their frailty limits their faith.
So Malcolm's point is, in a way, an illustration of what Ron and Lynn are saying, that they haven't yet cultivated one of the elements necessary for the survival of people, and that is a sense of faith. Right. So, it raises the interesting question of what is a miracle, and there are at least two understandings of this. One is a violation of the laws of nature, like the splitting of the Red Sea. Heschel's view is everything is a miracle. It's not, the word miracle as a violation of the laws of nature is a narrow way of understanding it. How we should understand it is that it's a wonder. So when I, just to be autobiographical about it, sat next to the table in the hospital when my wife gave birth to our children, I remember, my God, all 5 fingers are there. Now that is something I didn't understand. But it is intelligible. Somebody can understand how it happens through science. So, but it's still a wonder that they make. Heschel, I've said this before, was once asked, what makes you impressed? He said everything. the mere fact that there is what there is. So the violation of the laws of nature is a fragile reed on which to base faith. But the wonder of everything is ubiquitous, and therefore it depends upon our attitude toward it. So let's go back here just for a little bit. Now, this has been great. This has been great. So the people, now we're dealing with the manna, they store it up. They don't have faith that tomorrow we'll have manna, so they store up some of today's, and it produces maggots. So verse 27 of chapter 16. Yet some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you men refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? In the Hebrew, mitzvotai, my commandments, v'torotai, my teachings, from which we get the word Torah, the teaching par excellence. I don't want to suggest that's what's involved here, but maybe it's just a foreshadowing. Mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you 2 days of food on the sixth day. Let everyone remain where it is. Let no one leave his place on the seventh day. So the people remain inactive on the seventh day. So they called it manna, and they ate manna for 40 years. Let's go on to chapter 17. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole Israelite community continued by stages as the Lord would command. They encamped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses, give us water to drink. They said, and Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you try the Lord? But the people thirsted for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst? The Klein caucus thinks that that is a universal resistance of freedom, that freedom is tough. The Ron Lynn caucus thinks that, and maybe the Malcolm's in this caucus now, that it's still too early to expect the people to be firmer. Moses, verse 4, cried out to the Lord, saying, what shall I do with this people? Before long they will be stoning me. Then the Lord said to Moses, pass before the people, take with you some of the elders, and take along the rod with which you struck the Nile, and set out. I will be standing there before you on the rock at Horeb, which is another word for Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and the people will drink. This is a famous moment because you remember when Moses is kept from going into the promised land, it's because he did something deeply problematic in chapter 20 of Numbers. And one interpretation is Rashi's, that what was problematic is that God said, speak to the rock, and Moses struck the rock. And that was a sign of too little faith. That's Rashi's view. Oh, Rashi says, come on, you can't speak to the rock. You have to, you've got to strike it, and that's what Moses' thought process. Here, striking the rock is perfectly legitimate, so that if striking the rock is an act of too little faith, then that's what is going on here, so that we have to be careful about Rashi's interpretation. That's just a digression. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders. The place was named Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tried the Lord, saying, is the Lord present among us or not? Now, we could always say that the people are too young as a people to get this. But for me, this is being said over and over again in these chapters, which strikes me as a reach for something more general. I'm just reiterating my point. Verse 8. I recognize my point is under pressure. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Okay, so here's the third impediment by my reckoning. The problem of other people who can be enemies. Okay? Which of course trails all peoples throughout history. You know, with stretches of peace. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim, and Moses said to Joshua, pick some men for us and go out to do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I'll station myself on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses, this is our introduction to Joshua as an assistant of Moses, did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek. It's also not only an assistant of Moses, but a military, a warrior, which is his role in the book of Joshua. And Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Then whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. That's a dramatic image, isn't it? If the leader seems optimistic and beckoning, the people rise to the occasion. If the leader looks more despondent, then they don't fight as well. You'll probably resist that interpretation. But Moses' hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. It's a lovely moment, isn't it? Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set. Moses faltered, so Aaron and Hur helped him to raise his hands so the people would feel emboldened and optimistic. And Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it Adonai Nisi, the Lord is my banner. And he said it means hand upon the throne of the Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages. So it's an interesting moment here, isn't it? When the author, as the author regularly does, steps back from the narrative and says, now this is what this means forever. So Amalek becomes the paradigm of the enemies of the Jews. That's one of the reasons we stamp on when we say Haman's name, because stamping out Amalek. And throughout history, the enemies of the Jews are called a descendant or descendants of Amalek. Chapter 18. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. So the news is known. It's more widespread. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent home. We don't read anywhere previously that she was sent home, and now she was. And her two sons, one of whom was named Gershom, that is to say, I've been a stranger in a foreign land. Ger is a stranger. And the other was named Eliezer, meaning the God of my father was my help. Ezer, Eli, my God, Ezer, help. This is the first time we've had Eliezer mentioned. We've had Gershom mentioned. And he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and wife to him in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And this is an interesting kind of reminiscence, because what it seems to imply is the last time we saw Zipporah was in chapter 4, with the whole image of that strange event in the Torah about her, something to do with the circumcision. Let's go back there, because I'm not remembering it well enough myself. Chapter 4, I think it's verse 22. 24. 4:24. At a night encampment on the way, the Lord encountered him and sought to kill him. So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin, touched his leg with it, saying, "You are truly a bridegroom of blood to me." Totally mysterious passage. And when he let him alone, she added, "a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision." Let's not spend any time on this. I mean, it's terribly puzzling. Zipporah intercedes, and God was about to kill somebody. Sought to kill him. And she does something. It's not clear what she does to avert the plague. That's the last we hear of Zipporah until this moment. So now we can infer something we didn't know along the way, that Moses was without wife and child for this whole period in Egypt with the plagues and up to this point. Okay? So now she's back with him as his children. Back to 18. So he sent word to Moses. Let's go back to 5. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and wife to him in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, "I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons." Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed low, kissed him. Each asked about the other's welfare. V'yishalu ish l're'ehu l'shalom, which is now not peace, but well-being. And they went into the tent. And Moses then recounted to his father-in-law everything that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the kindness that the Lord had shown Israel when he delivered them from the Egyptians. "Blessed be the Lord." Now here's what's strange. "Vayomer Yitro Baruch Adonai." So he uses the personal name of God that was revealed to Moses alone, as opposed to the generic word Elohim, which everybody knows, so to speak, refers to the gods, whoever they are. So Jethro, by using Adonai, seems to be suggesting here a special intimacy with this people and its adventure. You may remember later in the book of Numbers, when the Israelites finally leave Mount Sinai, they ask Jethro to come with them. And Jethro says, "No, I'm going back home." But he's been with them all this time. "Blessed be the Lord, Jethro, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, yes, by the result of their very schemes against the people." And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to partake of the meal before God and Moses' father-in-law. So, let's see here. I do want to read something that Nahum Sarna, in his commentary on the book of Exodus, points out here in the name of one of the commentators about what we've just read. So, two distinct but interrelated units make up this chapter. Verses 1 through 12, which we just read, describing the visit of Jethro to the camp of Israel. And verses 13 to 26, dealing with his proposal for organizing the judicial system in Israel. The action of the two sections take place over 2 days. As early, Sarna says, as the 2nd century of the Common Era, it was recognized that this chapter is not in its proper chronological sequence, and that the episode took place after the revelation of Sinai. Okay? So what he's pointing out here is that chapter 18 should not really be before chapter 19 and 20, but after. The internal evidence for this judgment is set forth in the Talmud and in the Midrash and summarized by the great commentator Abraham ibn Ezra as follows. Let me read what Sarna does here with Ibn Ezra. The people are already encamped at the mountain of God here in verse 5. That is at Sinai, whereas the notice of their arrival there doesn't appear until chapter 19. Okay? So this chapter is saying that they arrived at the place they haven't arrived at yet. Jethro brings burnt offerings and sacrifices, verse 12, so that an altar must by this time exist. The only mention so far was located at Rephidim, not Sinai, and that was purely commemorative, not functional. Okay? Therefore, the altar on which the sacrifices are brought must be either that mentioned in chapter 24 or the one in the tabernacle, both belonging to the period following the revelation at Sinai. Moses and his father-in-law refer to the laws and teachings of God, a phrase that is far more appropriate following the giving of the Torah than before it. And then more evidence. Okay? Now Sarna. That the order of the narratives in the Torah need not necessarily be chronological was well recognized in rabbinic times. This is a stunning idea, isn't it? These are not marginal commentators who feel that chronology is not the crucial element here. Radak, David Kimchi, who subscribes to the view that this particular narrative is out of sequence, explains in one of his comments its intrusive position in the Torah as intending to contrast the treacherous behavior of the Amalekites with the friendliness of the Midianites. Now that's interesting. It doesn't belong here, but it was put here as a complement, C-O-M-P-L-E, to chapter 17. We just read about the Amalekites, not foe. Now we're reading about friend. It is to be noted that 1 Samuel chapter 15 can be adduced in support of this explanation. Before King Saul punished the Amalekites for their treacherous attack on Israel at the Exodus, he first exhorted the Kenites to evacuate the war zone because they had shown kindness to all the Israelites when they left Egypt. In other words, we have later the explicit contrast between Kenites, the descendants of Jethro, and the Amalekites. So that's a precedent for putting the two together. You see the point there? In fact, there's good reason to believe that the visit of Jethro to the Israelite camp belongs to a now lost record of a treaty of friendship between Israel and the Midianites, probably contracted with a view to neutralizing the Amalekite menace. Okay? At any rate, 1 Samuel 15 provides a clue to the present literary arrangement, which places the Jethro episode immediately after the account of the war with the Amalekites. At the same time, the second part of this chapter focuses on God's laws and teachings and deals with the administrative arrangements for their implementation in the daily life of the people, thereby smoothing the transition to the theme of the succeeding chapters, the giving of the law. So the two parts of chapter 18, the first part looks back to the Amalekites by way of contrast, and the second looks forward to Mount Sinai. So that though it could be argued, and has been argued, that this chapter is out of place, and therefore might be inferred that it was a mistake on the part of the editor to put it there, there's good reason for it to be there, even though it's not in the chronological order. And Rashi himself says there's no before or after in the Torah. So I was thinking about this earlier this morning. what are the implications of that idea that chronology should not be overestimated in terms of importance? Yeah. I know what I would like to infer from it, and that is, this is an allegory in some important ways, and that the meanings, the ideas are more important than the before and after. You can see that sort of a bias of mine. Michael?
Many years back, it was a rabbi who, on the first lecture of the study Torah, addressed to the class by saying, science answers the question how, Torah answers the question why, and that it should be approved. And that was your statement.
Okay, okay, very good.
And I think we constantly forget it. And today I had a clear demonstration how right you were when you answered last time to me, it's culture, interpretation. And when we're talking about Exodus and why and how and where was God, it's cultural. We think that Jews suffer in Egypt from the hard labor or abuse. But Jews in many countries, including Russia, were abused too. They suffer from oppression, from restriction, from limitations. Therefore, eventually, that creates frustration and desire of people to move out, to start something else. And many people got up, moved, without knowing what is waiting for them. And it was years that people tried to make their life put together. Some succeeded, some didn't. It was the young, it was old. It was the Jews and it was non-Jews. And that is repetition of Exodus. Therefore, when we're talking about Exodus, we have to ask our question, why? Is that going to be repeated all over every time when the small group of people will be suffered from moral, emotional, or physical? And they will brought to the point that they will stood up and say, enough is enough? That's how we should do it. And as far as God missing for 400 years, I don't remember somebody mentioned in one of the books of prophets, God said, I did not only help Jews to cross the Red Sea, not only Jews to get out from Egypt. I was busy helping others to do the same thing in different parts of the world. Therefore, he did not disappear anywhere.
He did
And
not.
that means that first couple hundred years, maybe after Joseph became a Pharaoh, Jews were fine. And they did not forget about the God. If I'm not mistaken, there were Jews who were just regular Jews, and there were Levites. Therefore, the religion exists, one or another form. It did not come on an empty space. Therefore, maybe we do not read correctly. Maybe we are from our cultural limitations. And as a matter of fact, I have to tell you, we had a dinner last night with a couple physicians. We were born in the United States. And we touched the subject of Exodus and oppression. And I found out that they have no knowledge what was going for 50, 60 years in Soviet Union and prior to this with the Jews. Why Jews joined this revolution movement called Bolshevik and communist, and how the Bolshevik and communists turned around and abused them later. That is result of general education.
Yeah. Well, you said a lot. Yeah, not the how, but the why. And the why is culture, creating a sense of values, norms, how to live in society is your idea. And we see the application of this story to a lot of stories that have taken place down through history. Okay, well, that's great. That's a good, nice comment. Right. Okay. Where are we? Jim.
It's more than coincidence regarding Jethro. He was, coincidentally, he becomes Moses' father-in-law. He wasn't just some average shepherd. He was, I think he was the chieftain or whatever of the Midianites.
Right, he was a priest.
And he had established, I believe, a territory that he was, I don't know what the term would be, chieftain or whatever. He was the head guy of that area, and the Israelites, they had no land, were tribal. And Jethro represents the fact that we've got to learn, and we have, how to live in the environment we end up in. Because as assimilated as we all might think we are, I've worked for over 50 years, not just in Beechwood, Ohio. We're visitors, and I don't think it'll ever change. And I think that's how we survived as an entity through 400 years in Egypt. We were always the other, and whether you like it or not, we still are the other. We're very comfortable here, we're Americans, and that's great, and I feel that way. But the German Jews thought they were Germans. They found out they weren't. And Hungary, Maya knows what happened there. Were you a Hungarian? No, you were a Jew. That's the way it is. And I think that's how we've survived as an entity rather than a nation. And that gets back to why Jethro was so important. We needed to affiliate with an established entity to continue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a strong statement. I feel compelled to respond just a little bit with the other side.
Okay.
I mean, we have existed for long stretches in history with other peoples and in host cultures and have thrived. I'm not sure you can judge the career of a people in these circumstances just by the final result, which is, of course, deeply, unspeakably tragic. We did thrive in the early Middle Ages until the High Middle Ages with the Crusades and so on. And also in terms of culture, we have been borrowers of the mores and the values of other societies, and we have brought them back into the house of Judaism and have improved our lot and deepened our culture by those values. I mean, you think of Maimonides just as an example, who was an Aristotelian. And of course, Maimonides has been criticized by Gershom Scholem especially for bringing a foreign culture into the house of Judaism. But think of how Maimonides enriched the understanding, the meaning of Judaism through his attempt at a synthesis. That's what it really was. and therefore saved a lot of Jews who were already deeply immersed in general philosophy and couldn't understand why we should maintain fidelity of the Torah, because the legacy of Aristotle is where the truth is. And what Maimonides did is showed that we can be both Aristotelians and deeply observant Jews. That's our challenge today. I mean, we go to the university and we learn psychology and sociology and mathematics, and we read about cultural relativism, that certain cultures' truths are true for them but not true, period. And therefore we begin to wonder whether or not our values are worth struggling for and holding on to, because it's just so subjective. I mean, we learn all of this at the university, which allows us to survive in modernity and to enrich our own understanding of ourselves. So while I feel the power and the pathos of what you're saying, and you express it very strongly, and I wouldn't want to deny much of it. I think it's important to complement it with the other part of our reality down through time, including today, don't you think? I mean, yeah, okay. But here we are, by the way, studying Torah in the synagogue on Shabbat, which is a sign that we intend to be faithful in our own way, in the variety of ways available to us, to our religion and our people. And nobody is making us be here on a sunny February morning. But we choose to do it, and we choose to do it although living immersed in the culture of general society. So it's possible to do both. I often like to say, where there's heat, there's light. And the conversation between Judaism and the cultural norms of a given time produce light for us. It's a way of surviving in our environment. And I think that's implied in your comment too, Jim, and that is the people learn to survive in Jethro's environment and thrive. Even though for every Jethro, there's an Amalek, an Amalekite. Yeah. So we are now getting to Mount Sinai, where we will continue next week. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
So Joan and I wanted to vote for all three.
I didn't offer that as an option. You should have raised your hand and said, why not all three?
Yeah, I thought about it, but
So it's the first or second word.
That's great.
So you know where you are, then you know where you are. So like, but the Shlach, the Shlach, the Shlach. Because now and then people the Shlach, but you need the Shlach first. The Shlach, you need the Shlach. No, you cannot. That Hebrew law is the Shlach. So it's always the key words of the first sentence of that.
You know, I did say poetry last week. Somebody suggested that we do given poet for a couple of weeks, which I think is a nice idea. And already I have 2 suggestions. One is Wallace Stevens. That would be great, but he's so hard. And the other is Berwin. That's a nice idea.
That's John's favorite.
I think we've done them too. So without necessarily doing 4 weeks on the road, we might do a poet for a couple of weeks to get into it. I have felt that too without being able to concretize whether because we bring this poem and that poem and it's all good. But some continuity also.
I would posit that you've created some continuity with the choices. There are common themes, but this is a more deeper look to see over time.
Sometimes there are common things.
Has anyone asked whether we should do other cultures' poetry, like haiku? Asian, so far is reflecting, I think it's been fairly Western-centric, our discussion.
And Stephen Lake, Steve and Meg.
Really?
I think I'm right about that. I mean, his research has always been that. So I can ask him about that. Maybe he would read the version to us or something. That's a good thought. The problem with it has been raised over and over is reading things in translation is probably not fair to the poet. We don't have another choice, but
In something like haiku that we did in 4th grade, we were asked to compose haiku poetry. It's just a whole different structure and view, and it might.
Are there? Do you want to do a little research? I mean, look around and see, select some haikus that we could look at. What is that, 17 syllables or something like that? So these are all short poems.
It's viewed as a high art to be able to distill one's feelings into such a small container.
No, I think it's a great idea. Look around a little bit. If we come up with, we could probably do 4 or 5 of them in a session.
Just as a different, exposure.
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea.
All right.
That's an Szymanski or something like that. It's does he look at the original Polish as well? We probably could find it. Oh, I agree. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, well, that's another person. Good.
All right,
Look what we accomplished here.
And,
That's-
very low-level humor.
That's not written in stone.
Okay.
I just was a test whether I could burn it, so we can change it if they're not right.
Hello, how are
I was
you?
wondering where you were. We take attendance, You were late.
You're right, I was hoping you wouldn't notice. Very low-level humor here, the discussion of Moses and his relationship to the rock.
Yes, yes.
Does that make him our very first rock star?
If That's funny. You must be getting a lot of responses to the article.
Every so often, and I'm just so pleased that for once Armand is getting some of the positive attention to all that he did. That sadly our supposed plain dealers' choice to not be in journalism format.
It's the burden of those who dare to do something in the public eye. They're always going to be under.
But thank you, I guess.
And you too. I mean, your role in all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Sure it has.
To use that word, interesting.
Right.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Take care, Amy.
I just want to share this with you. Flo is too shy to give this to you. But it's what's going to go out in the bag, and you can maybe share it with, I don't know, the Sunday school or whoever.
Okay, very good.
Whoever would like to see it. I think it's so nice, and Debbie Friedman decorated it for us, and it's just lovely. She is so helpful. It's going to be rolled up in a scroll, and it's going to go into the bag.
Who's being helpful, Debbie?
Yes. Oh, she's... To do stuff like this for us, none of us have the artistic and the technology to do it. And she just whips this stuff out and gets it printed for us and at a reduced price, and that we couldn't even do it. And that you saw the postcard too that she sent out was lovely. You even remarked about it. She's wonderful to do all this stuff for us. Yeah, and easy, so easy to work with.
Oh, she's great.
Yeah, I
And
know.
she also tolerates my tardiness in getting my rabbi's desk to her. She says, well, when am I going to get it? I'll say, a couple of days. All right, a couple of days, that's so what.
I know. She's really easy to work with, yeah.
She really is. Thanks, thank you.
People don't want to hear this.
Well, yeah, or, Rabbi, I wasn't trying to be controversial.
No. I thought you were
Because I was just saying, my book, look what it says. I said, I've worked for 55 years with the people. I just want to get through the day like anybody else. But
We failed at that.
you have a sense, right?
In 1984.
They're
a house
like
that
me.
smoked
You
everything in
know,
the
but I'm
house.
not like them.
There was a refrigerator that burst.
I had an interesting thing. Sometimes we have to do actual inventory of the boards and everything.
And
Count.
we had to either
Oh,
decide on.
the head foreman down in the yard called up, so I was going to do that.
Brought it down to very nice.
Says, I'm counting all this stuff, I'm having a rough time. But you're a Jew and you're good with numbers, can you help me? And I did not take it as an insult. It was a compliment. And it happens to be true.
In your case,
Yeah, I said, well, here's, I said, instead of counting each board, you count up the row and across and multiply. And I had to go through that about 10 times to get it.
You had a lot of good stuff.
I was trying. It would have taken them like a week.
I'm happy to do it.
She said, well, I knew you'd know something.
It is an expression of a stereotype, which maybe even in his own mind has some negative valences as well.
But I don't think he's aware of it.
But he also was complimented as a compliment.
I think what he really meant was, I can't figure out what to do here.
Right.
Jewish guy, I don't know what to do.
Not all Jewish guys, we know.
Oh, I know, I'm well aware of that.
Yeah.
Though my daughter with the numbers, she passes me. Which is interesting, my grandfather, was an accountant. He couldn't get it done because he was Jewish. And here we are, just 4 generations later, my daughter, my son, is the head of a huge mechanical engineering company. His buildings together like. So we put a long way.
flow.
one people, our enemies have made us.
Yeah, but
So it all works out.
That's what you regularly say, yeah. Oh, a lot of it does.
Made up.
I don't know.
We all-
Why didn't you get a copy by Hartzmark? Did it get sent to you? And you couldn't open it, or you didn't get it?
Excellent.
Well, did you look
We
for
have to
it?
make an effort.
I didn't know to look for it, but I
Okay,
did.
so,
Yeah.
Every day?
I did get the Friday night thing, you know.
There's the
So,
real.
I need to.
It looks like the other side, the first.
I'm telling you, I did not
What
have
if you want to know, I had to use the service.
Yeah, I saw it, someone came out electronically. But I was here that
But
day.
we have gone to
Spoke to my sister last night.
mail, and I don't know that.
She was
But
also.
the others.
You know how to find out if it's there?
Sorry?
Do you know how to find out if it's there?
Because you said that you wanted to explain.
But this Friday night information, that's the right email. So Roger and I.
Chris came over to me after I mentioned that.
I don't know,
Who's
because I don't,
sending it?
the temple is sent it.
Well, then it should come.
I
Right, so it's not-
guess this is been doing here 25 years. Retiree.
so how,
No, you don't.
So is that us?
There's a whole bunch of revival there.
Oh, I see. I was feeling fair. I mean, whether
We got all these different videos. And everybody gets along.
Extra.
No, probably March.
None of the above.
No, I'll tell you that.
Have a good week.
You too, and I get a call.
You know
yeah,
what
I
I'm
do,
telling you.
I
That's
know
why-
exactly what you
That's why
mean,
you want to found this movie.
Okay.
And then they did a copy and they gave us.
we don't
like,
have a service elevator, but one elevator is bigger than the other.
You have two elevators.
Yes, now, the other,
That's fine, I just thought.
you know, I wanted to buy a cell phone,
And
and I
it didn't,
bought one,
yeah,
and it didn't fit in the elevator.
right.
And somebody went down and they.
I
Right,
have
that's
a
what-
I knew there was.
yeah.
See, stuff like that, like I need a new bathroom.
Okay,
You have to
I'm
get
ready.
that bathtub.
If you can read, I think you'll understand.
I think I can read. I just didn't know what it was I was doing.
I know, well,
Okay.
the other, there are two bathrooms in the house, there is one. But the bathroom's not worn out, the finish is worn off in the top. She is, her back hurts her. So it's a